Hi everyone. The story I chose for my presentation is the novel The Ingenious Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha. This novel was written by Miguel de Cervantes and is often considered the first modern novel in Western literature. Don Quixote is a fictional landmark that chronicles one man's struggle to find meaning in a changing world. Miguel de Cervantes' masterpiece comprises two novels, published 10 years apart. In Part One, Cervantes weaves the tale of an idle country gentleman who descends into madness due to his obsession with chivalric adventure stories. In the second part, Cervantes sharpens his critique of society. Okay, so first of all, this novel is a really long novel. It comprehends about 126 chapters. So for that reason, I'm not gonna go through the whole story on this presentation. But what I'm going to do is to give you the importance of this novel for our mythology class, or why are they related. So what I found on this novel was folklore, was Spanish folklore. So basically, the whole story is gonna tell us of how Spanish people used to live at that time, and actually, the book also mocks or makes a satire of how Spanish people live before that time too. So it's basically gonna give us the folklore of two different times, which is the medieval age and the present of that time, which is going to be the early 16th century. Okay, so the importance on the folklore on this novel is that we can find daily traditions and senses of idealism and morality that existed on Spain and on Western Europe at that time. Don Quixote introduces the simplistic old morality into the complicated real world, with catastrophic but entertaining outcomes for us. Moreover, Don Quixote depicts a panoramic view of Spain in the 17th century, showing us its social institutions, economy, law, religion, rural spaces, urban spaces, art, science, and the universal values of the human experiences that we all can understand. So basically, Cervantes was showing us how Spain worked at that time, what people was believing at that time, what were their traditions, so on and so forth. An additional aspect is the chivalry code, as is so mentioned in this novel as well, and is also an important part of mythology. So, some of the code of conduct associated with this chivalry code I found on this novel, and I took some lines out of Don Quixote's mouth, was to be militarily brave, service to others, correcting injustices, righting wrongs, defending maidens, protecting widows, defending woman's honor, protecting guards, destroying the cruel, forgiving the modest, defending the church, and observing the will to do good to people of all kinds. Additionally, I also found a lot of symbolism in the novel that is repeating a lot, so I thought it was important to include it for our mythology purposes. So the first symbol I found were the inns, medieval inns. These were the equivalent of hotels for the people that was traveling. So at that time, it probably took a lot of time to travel from one city to another. You're gonna spend a lot of days on the countryside, so you need a place to stay. So inns were very traditional at that time. They repeat a lot in the novel. And they were also traditional places where people gathered to share ideas, opinions, the information. Also, the innkeepers of the owners of these inns were prominent members of society usually. This is also represented on the novel occasionally. Another symbol I found that repeats a lot are the horses. So horses, as part of traditions, were only supposed to be ridden by the nobility, by hidalgos. So just hidalgos or part of the nobility had horses and were allowed to ride them. Cervantes highlights this feature along his novel in several occasions. The fact, for example, that Don Quixote rides a horse and his squire instead just rides an ass is an example of that. Another example I found on the novel was there's a story when they are around the city of Barcelona and a lot of people are gathering outside the city, and the only people that are riding horses are actually knights or part of the nobility, and everyone else is just walking or like Sancho Panza riding an ass or a donkey. And this repeats a lot on the novel, so I think it was important too. And an additional symbol I found were the books. Books at this time of history were not at reach of everyone. Books were very expensive. Printing was not yet perfected art. So just wealthy people could afford them and have access to them. Moreover, the author criticized the books of this time, of his time, and before of his time too, by making satire of the Romance chivalry content. There in the novel, for instance, Don Quixote's maiden and helpers burn all of his books related to chivalry when they realized he had become crazy for reading them. So here we can see how Cervantes, by burning these books, is kind of like telling us, oh yeah, ancient books or books from before his time were just Romance chivalry that they didn't belong to that time anymore. Okay, so now I'm gonna give you a little bit of background information about this book. So I'm gonna start with the author. The author of the book was Miguel de Cervantes. He was born in 1547 and he died in 1616. He was born in Alcalá, close to Madrid. In 1570, Cervantes traveled to Italy, where he joined the Spanish military in Rome. On September of 1571, he fought bravely against the Turks at the Battle of Lepanto, where he was seriously wounded and lost the use of his left hand. Because of this, he earned the nickname of the One-Handed of Lepanto. Also because he was like really brave. Um, there are like history records that says that even when he was already wounded, he kept fighting. And yeah, in 1575, while returning to Spain, he was captured by pirates and sold as a slave to the Algerian viceroy. In 1780, he's ransomed at a cost that left his family broke and returned to Spain. In 1588, he becomes governor in the city of Seville, where he learned the folklore of the city that is represented in his novel. And in 1600, Cervantes, at the age of 50, started writing Don Quixote. So now I'm gonna give you some historical background of what was happening in Spain at that time when Cervantes wrote this novel. So just before the 15th and 16th, Spain was on its golden age. The Spanish army was the most powerful among European countries at the time, and it also began to expand overseas in American colonies. However, on the 17th century, Spanish economy collapsed as well as their armada and politics. While the rest of Europe appeared to be progressing toward new ideas and advancement in science, Spain, just like Don Quixote, retreated from change. Imperial Spain saw itself as the defender of the Catholic Church. That was happening at the time too. Um, Chivalry, romances, fantastic adventures of stories of knights, damsels in distress, giants, encounters were prolific bestsellers. However, they were losing popularity, and that's where Cervantes took his opportunity to make a satire to mock about these things so he can gain more audience. Spain was also constantly attacked by the Muslims and Moors at these times. Also, he was constantly fighting with England. Uh, but mainly with Muslims and Moors. So Cervantes includes some historical references on his novel about this. So, for example, there's an story where Don Quixote helps a Christian king against a Moorish one. A little bit more of background information. On this period of time, the Spanish social classes were mostly divided in just two different groups mainly. So you can either be part of the nobility, which will give you the title of Hidalgo. That's where the word Hidalgo comes from. That is just the title of nobility. Or you will be a peasant or merchant or farmer or whatever. Therefore, Cervantes includes on his novel pretty much all of these Spanish traditions at the moment that he includes Sancho Panza and Don Quixote. Pretty much Sancho Panza represents everything that is not the nobility, and Don Quixote represents nobility. These two represents the totality of the Spanish society in terms of social structure and traditions within. Another term, just in case you didn't know, Hidalgo is a member of the Spanish or Portuguese nobility. In popular usage, the term Hidalgo identifies a nobleman without a hereditary title. In practice, Hidalgos were exempted from paying taxes, yet they own little real property, just like Don Quixote does on this novel. There's a huge misunderstanding of the word Hidalgo. That's why I'm saying it right now. So Hidalgo is not a synonym for gentleman or clever, honorable, or other common mistranslations that sometimes occur. So Hidalgo is just the title given to the people that is part of nobility. There's also the knight errant term that appears in the story a lot of times. So I thought it was important to uh, put it on the presentation. So a knight errant would wander the land in search of adventures to prove his chivalric virtues, either in knightly duels or in some other pursuits of courtly love. So a knight errant would be what Don Quixote is trying to pursue on this novel. So basically, this is Spanish novel originally conceived as a comic satire against the chivalry romances, then in literary vogue. It was published in two different volumes, and Don Quixote is considered the most influential work of literature from the Spanish Golden Age and the entire Spanish literary canon. As a founding work of modern Western literature and one of the earliest canonic models, it regularly appears high in lists on the greatest work of fiction ever published. Okay, so now that we have covered the background information, I'm gonna proceed with the plot of the story. I'm gonna tell you what's gonna happen in the story. So, the first chapter is gonna tell us about Alonso Quijano, which is the real or actual name of Don Quixote when he's still sane. So he's the protagonist of the novel. He's an hidalgo, nearing the 50 years old of age, living in an unnamed section of La Mancha. So we don't know exactly which one is the name of the city. We know it's on La Mancha, which was an area, not a specific place. And he lives with his niece and housekeepers. He's part of a novelty, so he has money, he has lands, he has housekeepers, he has too much time, too much free time on his own. So that's why he decided to read all of his books he has on his house. Unfortunately for him, all of these books are really, really old. So they are talking, all of them, they are just talking about knight errants and chivalric romances. Although Alonso Quijano seems to be like a rational man, he's pretty much not sleeping too much, of course, because he's reading these books. And this caused on him problems with his brain. He loses his temperament easily, and as a result of that, he's like an angry person and believes every word of these fictional books of chivalry are true. So this is the how he started becoming crazy about them. Once he finished reading all his books, he's totally crazy at that time. He believes everything that those books says are reality, but for real, I mean, he's totally crazy. So in order to imitate the protagonists of these books, he decided to become a knight errant of himself in search of adventures. For this, he dons on an old suit of armor he found of probably his great grandparents, which is totally old and green and all dirty. And then is when he renames himself as Don Quixote too. He realizes on these medieval ages names were different, so he decided he has to change his name too. So then is when he comes with Don Quixote. He also realizes he needs a horse. Like I said before, there are no knights without a horse. So he has his very old horse, which is almost like sick and old. And he also renamed his horse. He put it the name of Rocinante. And finally, he designated to be her lover or her damsel, one of their neighbors, Aldonza Lorenzo, who he decided to change her name to Dulcinea del Toboso. Um, at the end of the story of the or at the end of the novel, we're gonna find out that actually he never ever talks to her. He didn't even meet her. So basically, everything is on his mind, even Dulcinea del Toboso. After his encounter with these muleteers on the inn, Don Quixote decides to move on, and while he's walking on the countryside, he has this encounter with some traders from Toledo. Accordingly to him, they insult Dulcinea, which is his damsel, so of course he attacks them, only to be severely beaten and be left on one side of the road. After he was beaten down, uh, someone brings him back to his house. Of course, he's totally unconscious there. His niece and his housekeeper take care of him, and the local barber burn most of the chivalry and other books because they realize that he becomes crazy and he's gonna be beaten by a lot of people if he keeps doing this. Okay, so after Don Quixote recovers himself, he realizes that if he wants to keep going to adventures, he must have a helper or a squire. Pretty much knights always have squires with them. So he says, hey, that's what I was missing. So he goes to his neighbor, Sancho Panza, and asks him to be his squire. Of course, Sancho Panza at first he refuses, like, oh no, why am gonna go with you? You're crazy and have better things to do. But Don Quixote tries to convince him by promising him a petty governorship into an island, invented island. So Sancho, because he's kind of greedy, he's part of the peasants and is not very intelligent at this time, agrees the offer and sneaks away with Don Quixote in the early dawn. It is here that their famous adventures begins, actually, starting with Don Quixote's attacks on the windmills. Okay, so now that Don Quixote has his companion, they both decided to start their adventures. As they are walking on the countryside, Don Quixote and Sancho come to a field of windmills, which Don Quixote mistakes for giants. Don Quixote charges at one of them at full speed, and his lance gets caught in the windmill sail, throwing him and Rocinante to the ground, of course. Don Quixote assures Sancho that same enemy enchanter who has stolen his livery turned the giants into windmills at the last minute. So this is the first and more clear example letting us know how crazy actually Don Quixote is and how much he's into the idea of being a knight. And so pretty much Don Quixote and Sancho Panza have tons of adventures, kind of like the one of the windmills. Um, every day it's a different story, it's a different adventure for them. Of course, Don Quixote is always making up these crazy stories, these crazy chivalry situations that he creates on his mind, bringing troubles for Sancho Panza and for himself a lot until at the end of the second part of the novel, Don Quixote has an encounter with some guy called Carrasco. Last name was Carrasco. This Carrasco guy defies or disproves this Don Quixote's title of knight, and actually he challenges him into a duel where Carrasco at first is beaten by Don Quixote, but Carrasco made disguises himself as a different knight who also is going to challenge into a duel to Don Quixote. So in that second fight, Don Quixote is beaten by Carrasco. This time he's beaten, finally realizes that he was crazy and that all this time he was just like too much into these chivalry ideas, and he decided to go back home where he just lies down on his bed. Of course, he's beaten, so he's also physically injured. But also in his mind, he feels like really bad. He feels he lost his will for living anymore. He doesn't find sense in life. He said that all that he did was a waste of time. He realizes that these chivalry ideas and all of this concept of morality have disappeared long ago, and there is no point, or it's pointless to bring them back again. So at the end of the novel, the actually Don Quixote recommended to his granddaughter, or someone that appears to be her granddaughter. He recommends to her to never ever ever read one of those books talking about romance and chivalry. So that's how the story ends, the novel ends.